Hello everyone and welcome back to another video here at the End-to-End Hockey channel. Today we've got a few things to discuss, including a couple of signings from a couple of teams around the NHL, some more injury updates from a few teams, and some more off-season rumors, this time talking about the eliminated teams in Anaheim and Columbus. Look into all of that coming up right now. Hello and welcome to another video here at the End-to-End Hockey channel. I'll kick things off today with a couple of signings that have happened over the past couple of days, as there have been 4 more entry-level contract signings, and most of these ones are significant. So we'll start with the Anaheim Ducks, as they were able to sign center Nikita Nestorenko to a 2-year entry-level contract. They'll have an average annual value of $925,000, and the contract will begin this season. So good to see Nestorenko get his entry-level contract. Now, he was a 2019 6th-round pick of the Minnesota Wild, was actually recently traded. He was the key piece dealt to the Anaheim Ducks in the John Klingberg deal that sent Klingberg to Minnesota in exchange for a 4th-round pick, Schuster, and Nestorenko. So good to see Nestorenko get signed. He's been playing really well over in college in the NCAA over the past little while. He had 7 goals and 24 points in 37 games last year, which was pretty good, but he even topped that this year, putting up 13 goals and 34 points in 36 games. So Nestorenko's done a fantastic job improving this year in college, and he looks like he could be a good bottom 6 forward. So he's already going to get a shot at the NHL level to finish off this season. He's already gone into a game of NHL action for the Ducks. He didn't put up any points, but I expect him to probably get a couple more games of NHL action before the season's over. And I think Nestorenko in the future could definitely be a good, maybe middle 6 forward for the Ducks. I think next year he probably would play in the minors. Maybe he carves out a bottom 6 role for the Ducks, but I think in 2 to 3 years' time he should definitely have a shot at being a good middle 6 forward with Anaheim. So good to see Nestorenko get signed. Maybe in time he can be a good 3rd, 2nd-line center. Maybe next year he can be a good 4th-line center, but still, good to see Nestorenko get into the lineup. It's good to see him get a shot to the end of this year, and hopefully maybe Nestorenko can be one of those good young players who makes the roster out of a training camp. But I wouldn't be too surprised if he maybe play in the AHL next year, and in a year or 2 times probably a consistent NHL forward. So good to see Nestorenko get signed, and I think he should definitely be a good addition for the Anaheim Ducks. Next, with the Toronto Maple Leafs, they have signed center Ryan Teverberg to a 3-year entry-level contract that have an average annual value of $852,000, and the contract will begin at the start of next season. So for Teverberg, he was a 2020 7th-round pick for the Toronto Maple Leafs, and to see him get signed is pretty good. It seems that the Maple Leafs view him as having a good future, possibly at the NHL level. He's a good 7th-round pick. It seems like a really good steal right now for the Leafs. Had some decent point totals playing in college in the NCAA. He had 14 goals and 32 points last year in 36 games. Did quite well. This year, not as productive, but basically around the same point total, having 15 goals and 30 points in 35 games. So not too much different than how much he did last year, but definitely good to see Teverberg have some pretty good seasons. I would expect him to probably play a year or 2 in minors, because I still think he needs some more development. But I think in time he could definitely be a good 4th-line forward, maybe 3rd-line forward for the Toronto Maple Leafs. He does seem like he has some good upside. So good to see Teverberg get signed just a few years after his draft. And I would expect Teverberg to play in the AHL for a couple of seasons, try and improve his game, and then in a couple of years' time, I could definitely see Teverberg being a good 4th or 3rd-line forward for the Toronto Maple Leafs. So good to see Teverberg get his entry-level contract. Next, with the Arizona Coyotes, they signed one of their top prospects, as they signed right winger Josh Doan to a 3-year entry-level contract that will have a cap hit of $925,000 and will begin at the start of next season. So for Doan, he is the son of former Arizona Coyotes legends Shane Doan. So it's good to see Shane Doan's son play with Arizona as well. He's gotten his entry-level contract. He'll start next season, but Doan is definitely one of the better prospects in the Arizona organization. I think Doan really has a huge potential of being like a top 6, at least top 9 forward with the Arizona Coyotes. He was a 2021 3rd-round pick, so definitely good to see him already get his entry-level contract. Doan, too, also was playing in college in the NCAA these past few seasons. Last year, he had a pretty decent point total, putting up 12 goals and 37 points in 35 games. This year, he's gotten more goals and more points, but in more games, as he has 16 goals and 38 points in 39 games. So definitely. He's definitely putting up some good point totals in college. I'll expect him to probably finish out the season in the AHL. Maybe play some of the next year in the AHL as well. But I think at some point next year, and if not next year, then definitely the year after, Doan should definitely be in the NHL lineup. And I think in time, Doan is definitely going to be a really good top six forward for this Arizona Coyotes team. So good to see Doan get signed, and hopefully he can be a really good middle six piece for the Arizona Coyotes for the foreseeable future. And lastly, here with the Buffalo Sabres, this is one that a lot of people really were hoping happens, and it did. As Buffalo Sabres have signed their top goalie prospect in probably the NHL right now, in Devin Levi, to a 3-year entry-level contract that'll have an average annual value of $925,000, and this contract will begin this season. So for Levi, he's been one of the top goaltending prospects in the NHL for the last couple of years. He was a 2020 7th-round pick of the Florida Panthers and looked like he would be a really good goalie prospect. And then was part of a trade package that went to Buffalo, as Buffalo acquired a couple of years ago a first-round pick as well as Levi from the Panthers in exchange for Sam Reinhart. So that was a really good trade for them. They got Yuri Kulich in last year's draft with that Florida pick, and they have now Devin Levi, who's probably the best goaltending prospect in the NHL. So good to see Levi get his NHL contract. He, as well, has also been playing in college in the NCAA over the past few seasons. Last year, he had an absolutely outstanding season, putting up a 1.54 goals against average and a .952 save percentage in 32 games. Now, those are really hard numbers to top, so I don't think it's too surprising that his numbers were a bit down this year. But he still have fantastic numbers this year for the NCAA, putting up 2.24 goals against average and a .933 save percentage in 34 games. So Levi still looks like an extremely good goaltending prospect. So I'll expect him to, in the next year or two, be an NHL goalie. I'm not exactly sure when he'll be a consistent NHL goalie. The Sabres still have Luukkonen and Comrie under contract for next year, so I wouldn't be too surprised if he maybe started in the AHL next year. But I think at some point next year, or at least the year after, Levi should definitely be a good goaltender for the Sabres. And because that contract kicks in this year, it does look like he may get an NHL shot. He's already been called up to a team. He hasn't gone into any games yet, so we're not sure if he will. But definitely, he definitely has a shot, I think, of playing maybe 1 or 2 NHL games before the season ends. But definitely, I think the future of this team is probably Levi and Luukkonen. So I'll definitely expect Levi to be a really good goaltender. If not next year, then the year after that. So good to see Levi get his entry-level contract, and hopefully he can remain a really good goaltender with Buffalo. So really good to see all these guys get signed. Good to see Nestorenko sign with Anaheim just after he was dealt by Minnesota. Good to see Teverberg get signed. You don't usually see 7th-round draft picks get signed very often. Hopefully he can make an impact in the NHL. Josh Doan was a really good prospect for Arizona. I expect him to do really well in a top 9 role for Arizona in the next year or two. And Devin Levi is probably the top goaltending prospect in the NHL. So good to see him sign with the Sabres. And hopefully he can be a really good either starting or backup goaltender in the next year or two. So good to see all 4 of these guys get signed. Next, we'll go over to the injury update part of the video. We'll start with the Nashville Predators, as they've had a couple of injury updates. As they got back Ryan McDonagh from his injury, but Roman Josi went down with another injury. So for McDonagh, he was suffering with an upper body injury. He was out for only about a week, so he only missed about a handful of games due to his injury, and he was right back in the game action. So good to see McDonagh back. He's a really good piece of that Preds D-core. He's a really good top 4 defenseman. I can really help defend well with that team. But the bad news for the Nashville Predators was to lose Roman Josi. Josi just suffered an upper body injury himself, and he's currently day-to-day. So not great news. The Josi-McDonagh swap, so they get McDonagh back, but they lose Josi. So it's not really a great trade-off. And hopefully Josi can be back in the near future. He's only day-to-day, so he shouldn't be out for an overly long period of time. And I'll expect him to be back probably within the next week, maybe week and a half. But I wouldn't expect Josi to be out too long. So good to see McDonagh get back in game action for the Preds and see him get back into a top 4 role and be a good veteran leader on this young Preds team. But definitely not great to see Josi go down with an injury, and hopefully he can get back in the near future and he's not out for an overly long period of time. So next over to the Pittsburgh Penguins, as they have had some bad news on their blue line, as Marcus Peterson, Jan Rutta, and Jeff Petrie are all out right now due to injuries on the blue line. So not great news for the Penguins. They have Marcus Pearson out week to week right now with lower body injury. Jan Rutta out lower body injury week to week. and Jeff Petry's out with an upper body injury, but he's only day-to-day. So for Peterson and Ruda, not great news. Peterson's been a really good top four defenseman this year for Pittsburgh. Definitely played on a bigger role if they've had guys injured like a Letang or Petry or Ruda. Definitely, he's been playing in a really good spot this year, so not great to see him go down with an injury. Ruda has also missed time due to injury this year, a couple of occasions. He's been a really good third pair defenseman in his first season with Pittsburgh, so not good to see him go down either. They're both out week to week, so hopefully it's only like a week, maybe 2 weeks. But it is possible that could be a little bit more longer term for both guys. So definitely a bad blow to the Penguins' D-core, and hopefully those two can get back in the near future, and they're not out for an overly long period of time. For Petry, he's only out day-to-day right now with upper body injury, so hopefully he's back within the next week, only missing like a game or two. But it could be a little bit more longer, so hopefully Petry's not going to be out for too long of a period of time, and he can get back into game action in the very near future. So not great news to lose Ruda and Pettersson due to injuries. The week-to-week status makes it very possible that could be a little bit more longer term, but hopefully they're not out for an overly long period of time. Petry should be back within the next game or two, and hopefully these three can all recover soon, as the Pens are pushing for a playoff spot, and could use all the help they can get. And with these three guys on the blue line injured, that blue line looks really, really weak right now. Next, over with the Minnesota Wild, they've had 3 activations, as they have activated Jonas Brodin off of injury reserve, and he's gone back to game action, while Doan and Foligno have recovered from their injuries as well. Now for Foligno, only missed about a week due to his lower body injury, was out for a very short period of time. He's definitely been in and out of the lineup this year due to injuries, but this past injury he wasn't out for an overly long period of time, so good to see him get back into game action. I would expect Foligno to definitely go back into a middle six role and definitely do really well as a good forward who can be really, really hard to play against and also produce offensively, so good to see Foligno get back. Doan missed just over 2 weeks due to a head injury, so it wasn't really great to see him go down with the injury, but it's good to see him back after only a couple of weeks. So he can be slotted back into a bottom 6 role for the Minnesota Wild and definitely help that forward group strengthen a little bit, and good to see Doan get back. The bigger one, I think, though, was Brodin. Brodin was dealing with a lower body injury, and he was out for just under a month. So he was out for a very long period of time. They were able to get him back off of an injury reserve and get him back into game action. So Brodin's a really good top 4 defenseman, probably one of the better shutdown defensemen in the NHL. So good to see him get back into game action, and hopefully he can provide a boost to that Minnesota Wild D-core. But definitely good to see Brodin get back into game action and help that Wild top 4, but also good to see Foligno and Doan back, as that strengthens their forward group. And as the Wild continue to try and get first in the Central, they'll need as much help as they can get, and getting these 3 players back is a big win for them. Next with the Florida Panthers, they've had good and bad news on the injury front, as Sam Bennett has suffered an undisclosed injury and is out day-to-day right now, while Giovanni Smith has returned from his injury. So for Bennett, he's been in and out of the lineup this year due to injuries. They've really been a tough thing for him this year. He's definitely, when he's been in the lineup, been a really good top 6 forward, playing second line center minutes for the Panthers, so not great to see him go down with an injury. The Panthers have some decent forward depth, so they should definitely be able to make do at least for the next little while. He's only out day-to-day, so he shouldn't be out for an overly long period of time, but definitely not good to see Bennett go down with yet another injury this year. As for Smith, he suffered a face injury back in February and missed just over a month due to his injury. He was on long-term injury reserve, and now he's back. So good to see Smith get back. That's going to strengthen their forward group a little bit more, and it's all that more important right now with the Bennett injury. So good to see Smith get back. He's a really good physical bottom 6 forward. He has been a really good pickup from the Florida Panthers after that trade in December. So good to see Smith get back. I would expect him to continue to be a really good 4th line forward for the Panthers. Be really hard to play against forward, and definitely increase their depth a little bit. But definitely not good to see Bennett go down with an injury, and given the fact he's only day-to-day, hopefully he's back within the next week and a half, but definitely bad to see Bennett go down with yet another injury. And lastly, with the Colorado Avalanche, they have a few injury updates, as Cale Makar and Evan Rodriguez have both suffered injuries, but Darren Helm and Curtis McDermott are both back from them. So for Makar, he suffered a lower body injury. He's out day-to-day right now, so not great. Makar suffered with a lot of concussions this year, so it's good to see that it's only a lower body injury. and he's only out day to day, so hopefully it isn't too long. He can be back within the next week. But definitely not good to see Makar go down with yet another injury that's really derailed his season this year. So hopefully Makar can get back in the near future. Off-season acquisition, Evan Rodriguez is suffering with a concussion right now, and he's going to be out for an unknown period of time. So not great news for Rodriguez. The unknown period really does make it difficult to wonder when he'll be back. I would hope that Rodriguez is back in the next week or two, but definitely not great to see Rodriguez go down with an injury. He's been a really good top six forward this year with the Avalanche, especially with a guy like Gabriel Landeskog injured right now. So losing him is not going to be great, but hopefully he can recover and return in the next little while. Meanwhile, Darren Helm, who had an undisclosed injury, and Curtis McDermott, who had a lower body injury, are both back and have returned to game action. Now for Helm, he had missed just over 2 months due to his undisclosed injury, and he had missed the first few months of the season due to another injury. So he's only played like a couple of games this year. So it hasn't been a great season for Helm, dealing with so many injuries, but it's good to see him get back into game action. He's still a really good bottom six forward, and if he can stay healthy, he should be a really good producer for the Colorado Avalanche on like the third or fourth line. So good to see Helm get back. McDermott was only out a week due to his lower body injury, and with Makar out right now due to injuries, it's good to see McDermott's healthy and back into game action. So good to see McDermott and Helm recover from their injuries. They should get back into game action and definitely help replace those losses of the injured players. But not great to see Makar and Rodriguez go down with an injury. And hopefully those two aren't out for overly long period of time, as the Avs do have a chance to win the Central Division as well. And they can use all the help they can get. And having their best defenseman and a really good top 9 forward back in the lineup in the near future would be a really big boost to them. So hopefully Makar and Rodriguez are not going to be injured for the very near future. That's all the injury updates I'm going to get to today. And lastly, I'm going to talk about some more off-season news. As we started this in our last video when we talked about the Blackhawks and Sharks who were eliminated, off-season plans, what they could be doing, who could be on the trade block. And now I want to sort of discuss the Ducks and the Jackets, who are two teams who have also been eliminated from playoff contention and are currently the other two teams who are out. There are 4 teams eliminated right now. It's the Hawks, the Sharks, the Ducks, and the Jackets. So we'll get to the Ducks first. They were the 3rd team in the West and the 4th team period to be eliminated from playoff contention. So once again, I don't think this is too surprising. The Ducks are another rebuilding team, and they don't have a really great roster right now, so I don't think it's too surprising that they round up missing the playoffs. But it's definitely been not a really great season this year. At one point, they were the lowest team in the NHL, and they looked like really a bomb dweller. They've played okay since then, and they've passed a couple of teams like the Hawks and the Sharks and the Jackets. But still, they're not really a great team, and they're still not doing overly well. And there's definitely not been really many stats that have gone their way this year. If you look at their goal scoring, they're second to last in the NHL, only ahead of the Chicago Blackhawks. If you look at goals against, they're dead last. They've given up the most goals out of any NHL team. If you look at their power play percentage, they're the 2nd worst team in the NHL. If you look at their penalty kill percentage, they're the 4th worst team in the NHL. So the Ducks have not been a great team, period, this year. They just have not been good. They also have suffered a lot of injuries. Guys like Klingberg, Boylo, Shattenkirk have all missed time due to injuries on the forward group. Drysdale's been out since November. So they have dealt with a lot of injuries to defense and goaltending, which I think is one of the reasons why they have the worst goals against in the NHL. But still, this team is not really made to make the playoffs right now. So what could they do in the offseason? Well, their big concerns for this year will be their extensions for their young players. Currently, their 3 probably best players on this team, and Jamie Drysdale, Trevor Zegras, and Troy Terry are all pending RFAs this year and all need new contracts. So that's going to be probably their biggest piece of business this year. Zegras is definitely going to need an extension. I would expect something around a 7 to 8 year deal at around $8 million or higher would be my guess. I would expect Terry to probably have somewhere between a 4 to 6 year deal at around $5 to $6 million, and I'll have Drysdale probably between $4.5 and $6.5 million on like a 5 to 8 year deal. So I would expect all these guys to probably get long-term deals. Drysdale's probably the one who's most likely to get a bridge deal, just given the fact that he's been injured since November and he's not played much this year. So if there was one of those guys to get a bridge deal, I think it would be Drysdale. But definitely, I think these 3 guys on their new deals would easily make more than $18 million. And the current cap hit for that team right now is $46 million. So that'll put them over the salary cap floor for next year, just signing Terry, Drysdale, and Zegras. So I think that's the big piece of business. Who could be on a trade block? Well, this team does not have very many defenders. They moved them all at the deadline. Shattenkirk and Nathan Boileau and Colton White are all UFAs this year, so I wouldn't expect them to probably move any defenders. Really, the only NHL level defenders that they have signed this year are Fowler and Vanakainen, and Drysdale's going to get a new extension, so I would expect them to try and bring in some defenders, maybe some on bad contracts, and not try to subtract any defenders on this team. In a couple of years' time, they should have a top four of something like Fowler, Drysdale, Zellweger, and Mintnyakov. So I think that's a really good top four in the future, but I think in the short term, they'll probably need to sign a couple more veterans or trade for a couple more veterans to just play stopgap for the next year or two, while Zellweger and Mintnyakov continue to grow in the juniors or the AHL. But on the forward group and goaltending wise, I think those two positions, they could definitely move a couple of players. In the forward group, I'm looking at a guy like Adam Henrique, Jakob Silfverberg, Frank Vetrano, and Max Comtois as possible trade candidates. There's been a lot of talk about Comtois being moved over the past year and a half. I think it's a possibility he gets moved in the offseason. Jakob Silfverberg and Adam Henrique only have a year left on their contract after this year. So Henrique and Silfverberg, I think, could be really good middle six forwards, middle six veterans on a really good team. So definitely would think that those two would have some interest. There's definitely a lot of interest at the deadline about Henrique, so I would definitely think those two are possibilities. Vetrano's probably less likely, but there was some talk over the course of the season that Vetrano could have been moved as well. So those would be the four guys I look for to possibly be dealt. In net, they have Stolarz as the pending UFA, given the fact they want Dostal to get some more playing time, and they feel like he's at least ready to be a backup. I would expect them to probably just let go of Stolarz and let him go to free agency. I think the bigger question entering the offseason is, does John Gibson wind up getting moved? There's a lot of good goaltenders that could be available this year. We've seen guys like Demko being mentioned, a guy like Carter Hart recently. Could Gibson also be moved as well? I think it's a possibility. I think he's still got either 4 or 5 years left at $6.2 million, so it's definitely not going to be an easy move. But there was talk towards last year's trade deadline that he would be moved. Some talk last offseason. There was some talk before this year's trade deadline he could be moved. So definitely, and I think there would be a long list of teams who would be interested. If the Flyers move Hart, if the Canucks move Demko, could they be interested in Gibson? Could the Kings be interested in Gibson, given the fact they're still looking for a starter? Could the Penguins be interested if Jerry goes to unrestricted free agency? So I think there would definitely be a handful of teams who would be interested in Gibson. So definitely would be interesting to see, but I think on the goaltending side, Gibson, and on the forward side, Vetrano, Silfverberg, Henrique, Comtois would all be interesting trade targets. And I think all 5 of these guys could wind up being moved in the offseason. But definitely, I think moving maybe some of these guys out, trying to bring some more younger guys in, getting those extensions done for those 3 players, trying to rework that defense a little bit while Zellweger and Mintnyakov continue to grow in the minors, give Dostal a bigger chance in the goaltending spot, maybe sign a couple of middle 6 forwards who could play with a guy like Zegras or Terry really well, and I think this next team could do well next year. Maybe not playoffs, but better than what they are this year. So I definitely think that should be the move for Anaheim. As for Columbus, they don't have much business to do in the offseason, at least for signings. They have a couple of low-end signings that they need to take care of, but most of their players are under contract for next year. I mean, they have their backup goalie at the moment, and Michael Hutchinson's a UFA. Guys like Mathieu Olivier and Lane Peterson, Igor Chinnikov are all RFAs, so they have a little bit of business, but those are mostly bottom 6 forwards, backup goaltender, so I don't really see them having much need to resign players a whole lot. I do think the Alex Texier situation is interesting. He's a really good middle 6 forward who took the year off to spend time closer to his family and played in Switzerland. So I wonder if maybe now that this year's done, Texier comes back to the NHL, if he stays overseas. It'll be really interesting to see. But I think if he does come back, Texier could definitely be a good middle 6 forward for the Jackets. But definitely, I think this team has already gotten a lot of players signed under contract, so they don't really need to sign many players. But I could see them sign maybe a player or 2 in free agency. As for players who could possibly be moved, in my eyes, I think one of Boqvist or Andrew Peeke will definitely be moved. They have a lot of really good defenders. Gudbranson, Bean, Werenski, Blankenberg, just to name a few. And they have a guy like David Jiricek who probably could make the initial roster next year. And I think this Jackets team has a really stacked blue line, so it wouldn't surprise me at all if they moved a younger guy. There was some talk at some points last year that Boqvist could have been moved. He wasn't doing overly well with the Jackets, and he could be moved at some point. So I do wonder if those trade rumors start to pick up again. If Boqvist does wind up being dealt by the Jackets, I think with the prospect of having Jiricek in the lineup next year, it is possible Boqvist gets moved. So he would be a name to watch on the defensive side. Goaltending, I think they're pretty much set. I'll probably have Merzlikins as a starter. If they feel Tarasov's good enough to be their backup, have Tarasov run as their backup. If they don't feel Tarasov's strong enough to be their backup, then maybe they send someone in free agency. But I definitely think that there's not going to move anyone in the goaltending position. If you look at the forward group, I could see maybe a guy like Boone Jenner or Jack Roslovic be moved. Roslovic's going to be entering the final year of his deal at $4 million. And I think that he hasn't really done overly well this year, so getting him a fresh start, there was some talk last offseason that he would get a fresh start before he signed this 2-year deal. I do wonder if he does wind up getting moved, especially given the fact he'll be entering the final year of his deal, and it does clear some cap space off the Jackets' books. And as for Boone Jenner, he'll have 3 years left on his deal after this year at a $3.8 million contract. So Jenner's a really good middle six center for the Jackets. He's their captain right now, but I do think it's possible that with the Jackets looking to upgrade the center position, he could wind up being moved. So I definitely think that guys like Jenner, Roslovic, Boqvist, or Peak could definitely be moved. And the guys who I could see on the trade block come this offseason. I definitely think they have a really good D core. It's just a little bit younger, and that's what didn't play well this year. I mean, they're currently 4th lowest in goal scoring and 3rd lowest in the goals against. So haven't been really good. Their special teams has been okay. They're 8th lowest in the penalty kill, and they're 10th lowest on the power play. So they haven't been overly great, but they haven't been bad either. I think the reason the Jackets did poorly this year has just been injuries. I mean, if you look at their team this year, Werenski's missed a whole bunch of games due to injury. Bean has missed a whole bunch of games due to injury. Blankenberg, Boqvist have both missed time due to injury. Merzlikins has missed time due to injury. When Korpisalo was still the Jackets, he missed time due to injury. On the forward group, Jenner's missed time due to injury. Laine and Gaudreau had missed time due to injury. So there have been a lot of injuries on this Jackets team. I think if they were healthy, and they consistently were a healthy team, this team would probably be closer to a playoff spot, I think, than the basement of the NHL. But with all these injuries, they just didn't really do well this year. So I think injuries have chalked up this season for the Jackets as a loss. And I think if they were to stay healthy next year and make these few improvements, they should be a much better team to play against next year. But definitely, I think if they can add maybe a backup goalie, maybe move a Boqvist or a Peak and bring in Jiricek, they have a really good top 6 right now. They have guys like Kent Johnson, Cole Sillinger, Laine and Gaudreau, Marchenko, and a couple of really good bottom 6 forwards as well. So I think if they were to bring maybe 1 or 2 middle 6 forwards in, trade like a Roslovic or a Jenner in the offseason and try and improve that middle 6, I think this team could definitely do really well next year. It would not surprise me if they were at least challenging for a playoff spot, maybe not making the playoffs, but at least challenging for a playoff spot. I think this year can just be chalked up to a ton of injuries on this team this year, and I think if they can improve, maybe tweak a few things this year, maybe get whoever they take in the draft, because there's a really good chance that they get a high-end player in the draft. Maybe they take him and place him in their top 9 as well. I think this Jackets team could definitely have a really good team next year. So it'll be definitely interesting to see, but I think there's definitely a couple of guys on that Jackets team who could be on a trade block. And I think if they can just tweak a few things here and there and stay healthy next year, this Jackets team should be a lot better. But I'd like to know what you think. What sort of moves do you think Anaheim and Columbus make in the offseason? What sort of contracts do you think the Ducks give Ziegler, Terry, Drysdale? And what sort of moves do you think the Jackets would make to sort of improve this team to try and be a more competitive team next year? So I'll definitely like to know what you think. But that's all I'm going to talk about for today. Remember to like this video and subscribe. I also do a blog, which I'll leave a link to that in the description below. I hope to have a blog on the Ducks and Jackets off-season rumors as well, maybe in the next week or two. And so I'll link that in the description below with my blog whenever I get around to posting that. And I can't wait to see you guys all for the next video. See you guys soon.